Okay, I'm going to guess that there is enough latency that by the time you're hearing this, it's actually 11:30. So I'll go ahead and get started. The beginning stuff is mostly just introduction anyway, but thank you so much for all of you to tuning in. I know, as Daniel mentioned earlier in his own live stream, there are a lot of people tuning in here, which is awesome. Just hoping that everybody is staying safe and sane in these times, and it's honestly just really awesome that we can all get together and share a lot of these mapping tips. So a bit about me. I am a graduate student at Oregon State University. I am a master's student here, finishing up my thesis, and I am in the conflict ecology lab working with Jamin Vandenhoek. Basically, that means we look at how conflict manifests in the landscape, and we use remote sensing and spatial analysis and other mapping and GIS techniques to do so. What that means is that I am using Earth Engine literally every day, and especially as I'm doing my thesis, like it is every day. So I'm really familiar with the interface. I didn't really think that I would be doing a lot with apps at all, or like the Earth Engine apps. It seemed kind of just something that I wouldn't need, that was something that I could look at later. But it ended up being a really great way to share and visualize my data. And as somebody who cares a lot about visualization, it was really, really helpful to realize how easy it can be to go from an Earth Engine script to an Earth Engine app. I was also approached by another professor. My advisor and I were approached to make a visualization for looking at sewage off the coast of Gaza. And we wanted something that was interactive, but that could also display remote sensing and satellite imagery. So an Earth Engine app ended up being the answer to that. And so that's really how I started diving a little bit more into Earth Engine apps and how we can use it to visualize our data. So as I've said before getting here, the links should be all down below. There's some resource links. There's the link to the Earth Engine code, which you will, you can only access the actual code if you have an Earth Engine account, but you can access the app if you don't. So the short link with the GEE app is just the app itself, and the short link below that is the actual code. And I'll be walking through the code, so if you don't have access to the code right now, if you don't have an Earth Engine account, part of this live stream is actually walking through that code. So the app that I made for this today that we'll be walking through is a seasonal NDVI patterns application. Basically, I just wanted to host something that was relatively straightforward for people who are used to remote sensing stuff. So NDVI is a really common visualization. It's the normalized different vegetation index, and basically it's kind of how green or productive a region of the landscape is. So basically this app allows you to select different month periods, and we're using 3 seasons because we're visualizing it in R, G, and B, so red, green, and blue. And each color represents each month phase. You can select a year for the composite, and then with the visualization parameters, you can either do RGB, which is all 3 seasons, or grayscale, which is just 1 season at a time. So all of these kind of select functions and widgets that we're looking at here, I will go through in the text a little bit more. We have a slider so that you can set the visual range for your minimum and maximum NDVI, a button to display the composite, a button to clear the composite, and kind of a visual image representation here to basically interpret the colors here. Sometimes it's not as intuitive. I noticed at least with students that I was TAing sometimes that like the concept of combining RG and B was confusing. So in place of a legend, I wanted to have this explainer. Again, getting a thumbnail within the Earth Engine app can also be challenging, so I'll go through that. And then a graph here to display data in a different way. In this case, we're displaying Landsat 8 satellite imagery on this map, which it's not displayed yet. And the graph down here is MODIS, which is just another satellite at a different temporal and spatial resolution. So these are the default parameters, and if we click Display Composite, it'll show a visualization of these 3 seasons. So this is Corvallis, Oregon, specifically right here, or actually here specifically. And this is the Willamette Valley, so it's relatively green all year around, but the specific colors in this case, we have season 2 is green. We have a lot of yellow and green, which means that we're in this range of the color palette. So NDVI is highest in season 1 and season 2, which we have specified with our month parameters up here. So that's the app. I'll be walking through the code, but kind of as a precursor to that, I wanted to highlight some of the resources for making an app on your own, because there are a lot of resources out there for figuring out code and figuring out what to do. There's some people that are making some really great apps out there, and I've also linked to them in the description below. Specifically, Justin Bratton, he works with Robert Kennedy here at OSU. He is making a lot of great Earth Engine apps and user interface. Genna D from the Netherlands and Josh Williams, again, I've linked to their descriptions or their basic Earth Engine repositories down below, but they have some really great examples that I've used to kind of figure out how I wanted to form my apps for visualization. Additionally, Earth Engine itself has like built-in features. So if you go into the code, they have a scripts tab down here where you can actually look at examples of code. And if you go all the way down to user interface, there's code already written that can help you basically build an app. And you can kind of customize it and change it. So those are some really great resources. Some of the other links that I put below are just to the actual Earth Engine developer guides. And I've really found all of those helpful when I'm making something or stuck on something and I need an explanation. Further, there's the Docs tab as well, which basically in apps, we're mostly working within the user interface side of things. So if I get a code error or something, and when I'm running and testing this and something's not making sense, I usually check the Docs tab to make sure that I am kind of including all of the required parameters in the right order, and that I'm not missing something. So those are kind of the resources that I use to check and troubleshoot and make the app. But although I use those to actually work through, I think that there's still some more fundamental things to think about when you're making an app. I usually like to start by kind of making a quick wireframe of how I want to set up my app. Like where I want my info panel, where I want my map panel, like kind of different options that I want to make sure to include. And this just helps frame it and helps me think about how I want to set up my code and my app itself. People have a lot of different approaches to coding and to making apps and stuff, so it's really up to you how you organize things. I tend to organize things a little bit more visually, so as we walk through my app, it'll be kind of more linear in terms of like how the panel is actually laid out. Some people prefer to write like all of the user input variables first and then the functions and then actually apply those functions. So that is really a personal thing. So what you're seeing here is simply my approach and not necessarily like everybody's approach, and it really does vary. I did also want to kind of highlight why using an app is so helpful with Earth Engine. You're basically hosting it on Earth Engine servers, and each individual app does have its own user limit. So there are limits to that. So like it cannot necessarily be used for kind of widespread mass usage, but it is still really great for looking at really large complex data that really occurs a lot with, excuse me, with remote sensing information. I mean, hosting remote sensing data and large image tiles and imagery is honestly probably one of the hardest parts of remote sensing, like especially previously, but Earth Engine is just a really great platform for not having to deal with that problem. So the sections that I have in this code are basically the style setup, setting up the root panels, and then each of the panels as they kind of go down on the side. I know that we'll probably definitely run out of time here because this is only a half-hour time slot. So a lot of the code is annotated, and as you have the link in the side or down below, you can really look at all of the different parts of this. And also feel free to email me and ask any questions about this later. There's a lot of really great resources out there. So if you're stuck on something, there's usually somebody who's also working through it. So it's very helpful. So one thing that is also really beneficial to the Earth Engine app is that you don't really have to change your coding style in any sort of way compared to, or I mean, you have to change like different user interfaces, but you're still using the same code editor. I prefer to write in JavaScript, so that's really what this code is in, but it's a very, very similar interface if you're already used to Earth Engine. So I really found that the jump from just doing Earth Engine coding to Earth Engine app coding was very simple. What makes it also very simple is that you really only need to click this apps button up here to like put your app into the world and like publish it. Because if you go here, you can create a new app and then you name it, you store it on a cloud project, which they recommend to just keep as your username. Essentially, you can use the current contents of the editor, you can choose a specific path, and then you can publish it. And honestly, really, that's it. It's really simple. And once you do that, you can update the script really quickly. I mean, I was, making updates to this earlier this week, and it populates pretty quickly. So that's really, really helpful. Let me see. Cool. So going back to the script, as I said, I'm kind of more of a visual learner, so I really think about setting this up in terms of panels and how I want my panels to appear. And that is why I have it organized as the root panel, the season panel, this panel, all of these. Panels are how you hold the widgets, and the widgets in this case are like the labeler, a checkbox, a slider, those kinds of things. So I really just use panels as a form of organization. So starting with the style, this is not always necessary. I just use it in a way to basically shorten my script later, and to keep track of different styles that I want. Because as you'll see later, there's like a section or an argument that you can include a specific style for your text. And if you kind of call them all in the beginning, then you can create a more uniform looking app, which is important for design. So that is the style section. So moving into actually developing it, the root panel is the most important part here. This specific app is a split panel approach. So we can basically slide this back and forth, and we have a map panel and an information panel. So basically the info panel is this panel that I'm holding all of my other text and information in. So I have to create that, and then I have to create the mapping panel, which actually makes a map where I'm displaying my data. If I wasn't doing the split panel, I wouldn't have to necessarily make a separate map panel, but because I'm implementing this approach, I need to actually like make it on top of the root. So the default root panel within an Earth Engine kind of interface is just the map. So because I'm doing the split panel, I need to clear that, which is this code right here, ui.root.clear, and then add my mapping panel and add my info panel. And so with there, you can really start to see things. Let me actually just copy this into a new script so that we can see what that looks like when you're starting from the ground up. So this is the app, or this is Earth Engine as it stands when you go to a new place. And if we copy and paste this code and run, we have an empty map and an empty panel, because that is what we've added. So from there, then you kind of build down, and you build the panels that you're putting aside, and you build the different actions, like what happens when you click on the map. And I think that's where maybe some of the hardest part of these Earth Engine apps is kind of the organization and how you functionalize everything. So how you actually make something happen when you click on the app. So in our case, I have this script adding a point of interest when you click somewhere on the map. And if I click somewhere else again, it removes the other point of interest and puts a new one and shifts the center of the map. So that is something that you have to actually apply an action to. So not only do you have to kind of make the actual like shape and the layer, the point of interest to add, you have to actually tell Earth Engine, like when you click, do this. And so those are kind of the things that I wanted to highlight first, at least the functions, because I feel like those are the harder parts of Earth Engine apps. Most of this stuff is like creating a panel and then like adding a label to the panel or the button. And that's pretty straightforward. I find that like the on-click functions, which I'll highlight right here, is really the challenge. So let's see. So here we have the graph panel. And this is down below. I've created it so if you click the button display graph, it shows a graph below. So in some ways, we have to actually add this kind of on-click function and add this within, like kind of nest it within the functions. So one thing that I do is I usually start in another script with my actual Earth Engine code. So if I know how to do something in Earth Engine period, but I'm not sure how to like make it show up on an app, I will start in a different code editor, sort through all of the potential issues with the actual like Earth Engine app or Earth Engine code in terms of like making the graph look how I want it, pulling the right data, and like really just making the actual science behind it work and display properly. And then you have to essentially just copy that in to the kind of on-click function. What happens with the on-click is that it will, let me see here. It registers, oh, hang on, that's like right where my face is. Let's see. Okay, that's better. It just allows you to tell the map to do something. If you click on the map, as you see here, it says the callback is passed an object containing the coordinates of the clicked point. So sometimes you can use what it default feeds back to, but you also don't have to. In this case, it's just a button. So you can't really do anything besides like click the button. And let's see. Yeah, so that's really the graph panel. Again, if you're not as familiar with Earth Engine, like this can be a little bit harder. And so I definitely would recommend getting more familiar with the just basic Earth Engine interface before trying to make an app. But there are some kind of low-level user interface options that you can start with. One challenge that I had with this as well was making the point disappear when you click on the map, which I noted before. And that kind of had me running into issues with client side and server side challenges, which is, if you're familiar with Earth Engine, the way it gathers data is through a server, and you're not supposed to really mix client side and server side commands. And so if you're trying to loop something, you sometimes run into essentially trying to loop through something on the server side rather than on the client side, and that's like not allowed and does not work. So you kind of have to work around that. So you can do some sort of looping thing here and get around that. And that's really what I was doing here with the points. So essentially, I am getting the layers of the mapping panel. I'm creating an empty list. I am, for every layer on the map, I'm getting the name of it, and then I get the index of that named point. So in this case, I'm looking for the point of interest. And then if that index like exists in the list, then I get it, and then I remove it, and then I add the new one. So it is very like somewhat kind of convoluted in ways, but I mean, that's also kind of the nature of coding. So again, I also wanted to include this in the script that if you guys are trying to struggle through this, you have an actual example of this, then you can kind of copy this code and make it work for your app. So that was one of the challenges. Another challenge was actually displaying the composite and making sure that users can actually clear the map and not have kind of consistent kind of composites like piling on top of each other. And so that's what the clear map button shows. And that is kind of a workaround. Sometimes you can like incorporate that within the actual function in the way that I did with the clicking on the map, but sometimes it's just easier to take the simple way out and actually just create a button for your user to clear the map. Um, let's see. Make sure I'm hitting some of the things. I mean, there are a lot of different methods that you could use here. I feel like it's sometimes hard to do a code walkthrough because you could just talk about all of the intricacies all day of the code. But I think highlighting those functions that I was talking about is probably the hardest part. Since we probably have a few more minutes, I will go back and walk through this a little bit more linearly. Let's see. So back to the root panel, I then created a season panel, a viz panel, and a graph panel. And since I noted this here, since we are going to store the season and visual graph panel within the info panel, we don't need to actually add it to the root. So basically everything from here on out, we are just adding to the info panel, which is stored on the root already. And the way that you actually add things to the panel is simply .add. And that goes for really adding any widget to the map. Let's see here. Yeah. So if you look here in the documents, again, this is kind of like the process that I go through if I'm stuck on something, checking what command I'm trying to use or what object I'm acting on, and then seeing what functions or options that I have, and then what parameters I have to include in those functions. So if we copy this into the new script, right now we just have this empty, and now we have a title because we added a UI.label seasonal and DVI patterns in the title style. So let me just make sure that we go over the selecting widgets too. One thing with the selecting widgets, which is, I guess, the season 1 start date is one thing, or one of the select options up here. You have to actually create a list for that option to pull from. And so you can give it both a label and a value. And often I find it easier to just create the list outside of the widget and then pull it in here with variables. So that's super helpful. And it can really allow a user to change the parameters and do a lot with that. Let's see. So I've got the selectors. I mean, the select widget is really one that I use a lot because it kind of constrains your user parameters and also like still allows for options. Let's see. Okay, yeah, let's go to the slider here. One thing that's really helpful is that all of the code essentially is formatted the same, so you can just do a lot of copy and pasting throughout the script. But the min and max slider is another way to allow user inputs that is more or less discrete than a select down. Let's see here. Now a text box is if you want a user to actually add in their own text. But the slider, I chose to do the slider for this because it actually constrains the user a little bit more and kind of can set a maximum, a minimum, and maximum, sorry, which for NDVI is actually important because you don't want to kind of overblow your image, and technically NDVI should not go above 1 or below -1. So let's see here. Yeah, this basically allows the user to set the maximum and minimums for the visualization. It doesn't actually change the data. Let's see, what else? It looks like the half hour is pretty much up. So I don't want to go too far past this. Definitely check out Sarah Bell's webinar after this because she does some really, really great design work for Esri. So I definitely recommend checking that out. Let's see. Yeah. I hope that I've been able to at least show some of the main functions here that are really helpful with Earth Engine or with the app edition. Oh, one thing before I do sign off, I know that people have to go and then I will be kind of actually like ending the live stream. But adding thumbnails is a kind of challenging thing, especially if you want to add your logo. You can't actually just add an image. You have to geo-reference it and then you can add it. So that was an issue that I found out when I was trying to add this specific visualization button. Yeah, so definitely take a look at the script and how I incorporated that. Let's see, RGB explainer. Yeah. I geo-referenced it in Q and then I imported it as an asset. So it was kind of a bit of a workaround. Yeah, all right. Thank you so much all for joining. This live stream should be available posted afterward. Again, feel free to reach out and let me know if you have any questions. I'll go back to the intro screen. Yeah, feel free to find me on Twitter, email me, check out these links. Let me know if you have any Earth Engine questions. I'm definitely used to answering and working through a lot of Earth Engine code. So I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon and please stay safe. Okay.